Welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. Come in, grab a cup of your favorite beverage, and get ready to join the storytelling conversation. Storycraft Cafe is brought to you by Dabble, the ultimate cloud-based fiction writing software. Here we're going to bring together storytellers from all walks to encourage and empower you to craft your best story. Thanks for joining us today in the Storycraft Cafe. Boy, do we have a fantastic show for you with the amazing Alex Marwood. It's a great conversation, and if you love the art of storytelling, you're going to absolutely adore this interview. Be sure to join us over at storycraft.cafe. Find your writing tribe, get plugged in, and it's like the best of social media, but only for writers, only for storytellers. It's this fantastic little corner of the internet that we love, and we hope that you do too. Be sure to join us over there because there's always notifications of live events like this interview with Alex Marwood was live on YouTube, and our the folks that join us there and the folks from the Storycraft Cafe always have the opportunity to join in on the conversation, pitch some questions and comments, and join in on the conversation. It kind of opens up the the vibe of it, and it's not just listening to two people chat, but it's a chat that you can be part of. Storycraft.cafe. We've got 3 live shows next week, so be sure to go over to Storycraft.cafe and find out, go look at the upcoming events, and I'll be updating that today so that you can, see what's coming up and you can come join in. Thanks, and let's hear from Alex Marwood now. And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I am so excited to have Alex Marwood on the show with me. Alex has a phenomenal new book, and it's called The Island of Lost Girls. And if you're here in the States where I am, it's release day. And I believe that this book has been available in the UK for a while now. Is that right, Alex?
Yeah, it came out in hardback last summer, but it's actually only just really, had its hard launch on the 9th of June. So it's all been a bit full on as it came out in paperback. But I find the whole process very terrifying.
I'm getting a bit of echo. Oh, well, you know what? I think it's from me. It was my fault. I was causing the echo. I'm so sorry about that. First off, I like to start conversations with a fun question, just to kind of set the tone for the conversation. And I've got one that I love asking people, and it goes something like this. Alex, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Gosh, I mean, really, I can't remember a time when I didn't, I think. My first memory of realizing the sort of stuff I wanted to do was probably when I was 5 or 6. I was a horribly precocious reader, and the youngest in my family, and everybody just forgot how young I was. And I remember my oldest friend Claudia, who I'm still friends with now, her mother picked up a book of horror stories for teenagers for my birthday present one year. And I, and my family, bless them, I mean, they just gave me let me loose with an adult library card the moment they could. And so they just, that not for 1 second did anybody say, is this, suitable reading for a 6-year-old? So I read this, and it was full of absolutely stuff that was absolutely terrifying to a 6-year-old, and I was absolutely bought. I bought right into it, right then, right there, and just went, I want to write this sort of stuff when I grow up. And so I think that's it.
And you have succeeded at that for sure.
Well, thank you.
And I mean that in the most complimentary way.
In the nicest possible way.
Right. You gave me nightmares in the sweetest possible.
Oh, you are wonderful. Thank you so much, Hank.
So Alex, do I understand right that you began your professional career as a journalist?
Yes, I mean, I you know how, there really isn't any sort of career path laid out for writers, So I read English at university, English literature, and then I sort of assumed that I would then just go off and write some books, and then it would all be marvelous. And I temped in the meantime, and then it just never occurred to me that there were other sorts of writing, basically. But one day I ended up covering the secretary on the arts desk at the Independent newspaper, which was a very splendid broadsheet newspaper at the time, for her 2-week holidays, and found myself in the middle of this, of really my fantasy world. I mean, just all these really, really clever people writing, finding stuff out at great speed and writing it at great speed and pretending that what they were doing was really easy. And I just fell in love. So then I started doing casual subbing shifts, and whenever I heard the words, "Who can we get to write that?" I would stick my hand up. And then I ended up being the crossword editor as my first sort of full-time actual job with a salary. And that was actually great. I mean, it's a mad job. But that also was marvelous because it just left me, in place all the time. Just being fed and fed and fed just this extraordinary world of the fact that there is so much to know out there.
Right. Did you ever find yourself reporting on crime?
Not really, no. I was basically, I was a jobbing features writer was what I did. I did do some bits and pieces every now and then for news, but mostly because somebody would go, "Look, this is such a barking mad story that Serena's got to do that." Sorry, my real name, by the way, is Serena. And but yeah, I ended up being basically a jobbing features writer, and I sort of specialized in doing stuff about people who were a bit odd doing stuff that was a bit odd. And I seem to have some, talent for getting people who sort of, don't fit in particularly in the world to trust me enough to talk to me. Yeah. And I had a lovely column at one point where I was basically I was given a broadsheet page every Saturday to do whatever I wanted. And I just sort of hunted around for sort of just stories that interested me. So I'd get, I'd just have those sort of, I wonder what happens when ideas, and then I would go and ring a few people up and find somebody. So I did everything from I once went and interviewed, it turned out to be a man who had who collected lawnmowers, and not just any old lawnmowers, an actual specific lawnmower made by a specific company. Sorry, I look like I'm doing a pack shot here, don't and he had a collection of something like 800 lawnmowers, all
wow,
the same company. And he had this terribly, terribly ancient mother. I mean, he must have been in his 60s then. She must have been in her late 80s, I think.
Wow.
And her hobby was topiary. And I don't mean little topiaries. I mean, gigantic 10-foot lions, or
oh, wow.
And I went down that, and there he was, he talked to his lawnmowers, and she was up a ladder carving unicorns out.
Oh, that's so funny.
And then the following week I went down into the London Underground when they were building the Jubilee Line extension, and walked all the way from London Bridge to Canary Wharf underground while it was still while it wasn't running, and it was just really fun. And that, I went to the livestock sales at Newmarket and just watched literally billions of pounds exchanging hands in a matter of minutes, and it was just really fun. And then I also I had a certain sort of facility for just making stuff up, so I ended up with 3 columns under different names. One was my name, and I was sort of the slightly off-beam hippie that I am, and getting into sort of, into scrapes at bus stops. And then I wrote a sort of fake, agony aunt column, where the Independent was a bit highfalutin and didn't really do celebrity gossip. So I would just pretend to be the celebrity writing to me for advice about what to do about, and that worked really well. And then I had a third one which was anonymous called The Temp, which where I was I basically, so my editor had asked me to sex up the secretarial pages, and I came up with this idea, which is basically an office anthropology column weekly, and I was an anonymous temp going around offices watching the way people kid themselves about about themselves, and doing, and it was lovely because that just every time I got bored with one theme, I'd just be able to move office.
So it sounds like you got to merge the worlds of journalism and creative fiction writing just from the get-go.
Yeah, which was really, really great. I mean, it and none of it, I don't think any of my life has ever been planned out. It turned out actually during lockdown. I finally got around to actually wondering about my brain, and I discovered that I actually have really quite profound combined type ADHD. And suddenly everything fell into place about the sort of chaotic way that I have run my life, and why it's worked sort of for me.
I can completely relate to that.
Yeah.
Alex, if you were to ask a successful writer, invariably anyone across the spectrum, about how do you become a writer, or how do you become a better writer, invariably they will give you 2 pieces of advice that I think are essential. And I think Stephen King famously put it in his book on writing. You've got to read a lot. You have to understand how stories work and how the written form works. And really, you only learn that from reading other writers and familiarizing yourself with the form. And the second thing is you have to write a lot. You have to practice. You have to do it wrong so many times until you get it right. Ray Bradbury famously said you should write a short story, a different one every single week of the year, because at the end of it, surely you can't write 50 bad short stories.
Yes.
which is kind of funny, but there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would add to the read a lot. I would add reread a lot.
Yes.
Because there is so much to be got from reading a book again. Once you've understood that what you've read was really good and that it really worked, you read it a second time and you actually watch and see what the writer is doing and try to work out if that is something that you can do yourself.
And I'll add to what you just said, that especially thrillers and hook heavy stories or twist heavy stories, because you read through once and you get to the twist and you're like, oh my gosh, I never saw it coming. Well, then rereading is super important, because then you get to take notes on the setup and the misdirection and
Absolutely, and they're really clever ways in which
right,
the whole thing has actually been planted there. If somebody is not cheating and not, using a Deus Ex Machina, you will
right.
you will find that the entire story is absolutely there, waiting for you if you read it a second time.
Yeah,
And that is that's very much part of the satisfaction of a really good thriller, I think, is actually
right.
realizing that although you have been red herringed and you've been played with, actually nobody's cheated, and you have been absolutely told what was going on all the time.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, if we have the two rules, the cardinal rules, read a
Yeah,
lot, write a lot,
yeah,
I like to add a third to that, and that is to get out and talk to people.
yeah.
And writers always like to talk about being
So
introverts
sorry,
and
hang on, my
you know,
my phone went off. Right,
sure.
okay, yeah,
Writers love to talk about being introverts, and we love to
yes,
stay inside and with
yes,
our characters. But I think it's essential to get out and interact with people and to
absolutely.
like you had the opportunity to do with some of your columns, to interact with unique characters.
Absolutely. Journalism, I think, was the best possible training for being a writer, because it constantly forced me out of my comfort zone. I don't actually think of myself as a particularly extroverted person, but I had to, it forced me to go and talk to people, and to not just talk to them, but actually interact them and get them to talk to me, which is actually much, much more important. But also it taught me to be a lot less uh, what's the word, princessy about my work.
Yeah.
My editor once said to me that she absolutely loves her ex-journalist writers because we're all so startled that anybody actually asks our opinion about it.
The the first novel that you published, was that The Wicked Girls? Was that the first one?
That was the first Marwood novel, but I had actually written 4 before that, or had 4 published before that under my own name.
Okay.
And in fact, the very first one, my real name is Serena Mackesy. The books are long gone, but my first one actually did very well, and it actually came out of the column I was writing called The Temp. And it started in a world where most of the letters you get are written in green ink. It started getting fan mail. And
Wow.
and I just looked at it and I thought, actually, you know what, I could fardle this up into a sort of 20-something rites of passage novel. So I did, and it did very well. And then the problem with that was that it was just around the time that the Bridget Jones's Diary was the biggest thing in the universe, and absolutely every woman who wrote a book, especially if she had a hyper feminine name like Serena, got a cover with a girl shrugging and a handbag on the front, and so then I became a chick-lit author.
Funny.
And it was very difficult to break out from that, and I realized it while I was writing my third one, which is called Simply Heaven, which I was sort of playing with doing a sort of modern Gothic novel. And I realized that I'd just walled my heroine up with the desiccated corpse of her father-in-law's first wife. And I thought, this has got to stop, I'm just going to. And then it took me one more book to then just go, you know what, I'm changing my name and starting again. But yeah. So The Wicked Girls was my first Marwood book, and that came out in 2012 in the UK.
So what precipitated the change in your writing style? Does this go back to your early love of
It was
scary
more,
stories?
yeah, it was more that I just, where what really happened was that I changed my name and actually pitched myself into into the genre that I ought to have been in. All of my books actually are dark and have really dark themes running through them. And but it was just a piece of ill fortune that I was that I was sort of shoved into a genre that didn't fit me. And the only way to get out of that ultimately, especially if you've got a name that's as sort of recognizable and feminine, is to just change your name and become somebody else. So that's what I did, and I would cheerfully do it again anytime.
I bet. I remember reading The Wicked Girls a number of years ago. I
Yep.
can't really remember how I came about. Anyway, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What does matter is that I remember opening the book. I was sitting in this big comfy chair that we have in our living room and reading through the first chapter and just being hooked. And the next thing
Well,
I
thank you.
realize I'm 3/4 of the way through the book and it's like 2 a.m.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I was just completely lost, which
Yeah.
as a writer, that's exactly what you want to happen.
That's precisely the sort of thing that makes your heart sing when somebody tells you that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Your stories, Wicked Girls, The Darkest Secret, Island of the Lost Girls, have this quality about them that feels like they are ripped directly from the headlines. That these are story plots, story setups that could be a documentary on some true crime, uh, you know, uh, channel on
Thank
TV or
you.
something.
Yeah.
And it is disturbing on one hand, but also captivating in the sense that you just can't take your eyes away from a car
Thank you
wreck
so
that you know you shouldn't be
Yeah.
glamorizing, but you just can't help but but see what's going on. How do you and
Mm.
let me say it like this. I am fascinated with this is one of my great fascinations in life is where stories begin. And I'm not
Mm.
talking about where, the trite question that people say, where do
Yeah.
you get
What's
your
your
ideas from?
inspiration? Yeah.
Everybody gets that. But
Yeah.
what I'm fascinated by is that one moment, the the island of lost girls, for instance, does
Yeah.
not exist. And then either you're thinking about a news story, maybe you're um, whatever it is, and then a character walks onto the stage of your mind, and then the what if game starts playing, and then at some point, um, the island of lost girls does exist, and then
Mm.
it's your job as the writer to dig it out of the ground and
Mm.
excavate it and
Mm.
polish it up, and then we have a book at the end of it. So
Yes.
for you, what is that moment of creation like?
Oh, well, actually, funny, I was describing it to somebody last night as watching figures walk out of the fog towards you.
Mm,
And what always my process, I'm very chaotic, but what will happen is that something will give me an idea of something I want to write about, and that's not the same thing as the plot, you know. And it nearly always, in fact, yeah, always has been something that happened in real life will kick me off and start me thinking about what I want to take away from that thing. Sorry, that's not very articulate. I know it's but I think one of the things that I'm quite good at is spotting societal trends early on in as they as they're coming up. So I often get accused of having written in a huge hurry, trying to, jump onto a wave or whatever. And it takes me 2 years to write a book. So, actually I will have had the thoughts. So with the Island of Lost Girls, there were a number of things that, all came clashing together. Obviously, the Epstein case.
right.
Um, But also in the UK, we've had some really horrific grooming scandals, absolutely horrific. In working class towns right across the country, there have been gangs of men who have been grooming teenage girls into first off rape and underage sex, but then prostituting them out, and the police have known about it, and all of the bodies employed to safeguard all these young children absolutely dropped the ball and avoided bringing prosecutions, largely because of the ethnic makeup of the men in the grooming gangs, and the fear of being called racist for having done this. But in the end, the two people forced a prosecution through on this, and it was a female whistleblower from the police, and then a Crown prosecutor who is of the same ethnic background as the perpetrators. And this omerta, this absolute omerta on we will not do anything about this, and the way that the girls, as a result of this, were consistently written off in the record as basically being, she's no better than she ought to be, basically, it was really terrifying. And we are talking thousands of girls, literally thousands of girls had this done to them over the course of about 10 years. And at the same time, a TV celebrity called Jimmy Savile, who had been working for the BBC for decades, turned out to have been a serial paedophile just after his death. And again, the BBC had known all about it, known it was going on, and had done nothing about it. They'd done nothing about it. And to our enormous shame, this was brought to the Crown Prosecution Service, and they decided not to prosecute him. Now, the person who was in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service when both of these decisions were made was actually Keir Starmer, who is now the leader of the Labour Party and tipped to be our next Prime Minister. So that was what I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about the fact that, nothing has changed. You've had all this lovely, pretty language about inclusivity and diversity and all the rest of it has been just larded over the top of same old misogynist paedophilia. And all these people's self-interest driving them to do nothing to protect the victims. So, gosh, yes, sorry, that was a rant.
No, that was I am vaguely familiar with the Savile case. I think most people in the world know something about it. Obviously not as much information here as in the UK, because that was a very but here in the States, the Epstein case has been big news. One thing that I notice is that we know a lot about Epstein, and we know a lot about his crimes, and we don't know an awful lot about the victims, and for a lot of different reasons. I mean, they've been through enough; they don't need to be paraded about, and so I understand why we don't know a lot about the victims.
And I think they've quite I completely understand why they have taken the compensation and accepted shutting up. I really do. I understand it. Ghislaine Maxwell is a very, very fascinating individual. I've always been rather fascinated by her. I grew up in the same city and she actually went to my school, but before I came to it, and then there were entrance exams, and she failed them, and I passed. So then we never actually crossed over. But her father was a massive crook, and one of the things that I also wanted to write about was I said this to my editor, and she just went, "Oh yes." So this was the actual sort of kernel of the thing that I wanted, that I sold it in on, which was how the daughters of great crooks are groomed to enable the next generation of crooks. And so I was very interested by Maxwell, but also by, a number of high profile daughters of high profile fraudsters who have followed very similar.
One thing that I love about the Island of Lost Girls is that we do get to see this through the eyes of the victims.
The victims,
and that was there's a lot of not a lot of books like this, because I think this is still pretty new territory for novelists to dig into. But there are other stories where we really get into the mind of the abusers and like that, but you give us a different perspective in this book, and that it felt to me like that was a very a very deliberate choice to view the story from that viewpoint.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a theme really that runs through all of my books, is just that I am more interested in the fallout for the victims, and also the fallout for wider society of awful things happening, than I am really in I mean, I think I'm as interested in a serial killer as anybody else who does our job is, but actually I do think that the thing that really isn't getting explored enough, and that I'm really interested in exploring, is actually the repercussions for the victims of, that will last a lifetime, and the repercussions for their families and for all the people who, carry the guilt of not having done anything. The people, and the people who, how people rationalize to themselves also the ways that they have failed to act when they could have protected somebody. I think that is just, it will always be interesting to me, that.
The narrative style that you chose in the Island of Lost Girls, we're dealing with dual timelines, which I love. I love getting to tease out a portion of the story and then switch to a completely different, and you find yourself while reading the second timeline wondering what's going on in the other, and then looking for, she's doing this on purpose, so what am I going to learn here that's going to inform the other? When you're writing that, how do you manage the two timelines? Do you write them?
I do actually write them roughly as they will appear in the book.
Okay.
Because I think it is really important. The timelines always inform each other, and the point at which they stop and start always informs the other half. And the only way to do that really is to sort of just keep doing it as I go along. I don't really, I usually have an idea of where I'm going and where I'm starting, but I have very little idea of how I'm going to get there. And that is partly, I think that actually is probably a feature of ADHD, actually, because ADHD people do tend to get bored and wander off if they know what they're doing, So I just have to, I have to be teasing it out as a mystery to myself. Otherwise, I would just never finish a book. That said, I also, sometimes there will be just a great white hole where I don't know what's going in there, and I won't know until I've got to the end, and I'll just leave that with a sort of, a place marker going, there's something, but you need to find out what it is. I didn't, for instance, realize that part of Mercedes's story was that, you know, she wasn't just, you know, still working for all these people after all these years. She'd actually been trapped into being an indentured servant until I'd actually pretty much, I was just about to sign off my copy edits actually. And I suddenly realized, and it made absolutely every difference to how I felt about her and the moral imponderables of her existence. You know, all of these people working in this house where terrible things are going on, and why, you know, why do they not at some point stop it? And there are so many reasons, and I'm fascinated by that. But, you know, in the end, Mercedes didn't stop it because she was basically a slave.
Right.
Um,
Isn't it amazing when you have that moment of epiphany,
it's
when when you crack the code and
yeah.
you're like, oh my gosh, this is why it all works.
This number, wait, yeah. And also the really great thing is that whenever I've had that happen to me, I'll then, you know, go dashing back to do rewrites and you know, stick in a bit of extra stuff. And I'll usually realize that it's actually I actually need to do very little. And that I've actually been planting it in the book all the time, but my brain wasn't actually seeing what I was doing until I finally got it. And actually, in a funny way, I think that's really good, because I think it sort of makes it much more naturalistic that I don't know myself what I'm doing. And yet I am, and yet I actually do. It's just that I don't realize that. I think that I would probably be much more heavy-handed with planting that stuff if I knew that that was what I was doing, whereas actually just, you know, it has always been putting itself in there.
Yeah. People that don't understand this style of writing and you know, consider themselves more plotters, you know, outliners ahead of time, that idea of kind of writing into the void terrifies them.
Yes.
Is there a time where you learn to trust yourself and your creative process? Because like you said that you know, you could be heavy-handed and overbearing with your writing if you weren't so confident that the story would come. Is there a point where that confidence, that kind of sense of being settled in, I'm just going to write, I know the story will get there?
I actually find it very stressful, and I live in a state of permanent fear, to be honest. I know another writer who writes like me is the wonderful Lisa Jewell, who
Yes.
has been doing terribly well, and she also writes in the same way. And we do, you know, we've actually known each other because we both came out around the same time as Bridget Jones. We've actually followed quite similar paths, only I went earlier than she did. And again, she was writing these very dark books, but they were being packaged as being women's interest books, you know, and then but she jumped without changing her name, you know.
Yeah.
But Lisa also writes like that, and she also finds it absolutely terrifying. And we both, you don't feel confident of it, right? You know, every single time I finish, I probably know where I'm going about 3 chapters before the end. I usually know where I'm going for about 3 chapters out from where I am, and it's only about 3 chapters before the end that I know that that's where I'm going and that is the end. And it's really terrifying, and I think Lisa finds it really terrifying too. However, I think that, you know, if that is the way you write, you cannot do it any other way. God knows I've tried plotting ahead of time. I've got another friend who, you know, actually plots on a spreadsheet, for God's sake. So
do you have an idea of the final resolution of the book?
I always have some. I always sort of know that I'm going for a happy ending or a sad ending, if you see what I mean.
Right.
And I know I usually have a pretty good idea of who's going to die at the beginning. Yeah, so I'm incredibly lucky because I have always had an editor who trusted me with this and just let me go with it. And God knows it must be stressful. Because I just go, okay, look, here's my idea, here's the sort of the setup, and I think I'm going to kill this person and this person by the end, and I have been so lucky because they just trust me, let me do it.
Wow. This book is debuting in the United States today. It's been out in the UK for quite a while. Is that that has to be an interesting journey of publication? That this book has been out, it's been well received by one group of readers, and it almost feels it must feel this is something I've already done. I've already had this emotional roller coaster, and now here it is. A whole new audience is experiencing it for the first time.
Yeah.
And what is that like?
Actually, it's fine. I mean, I'm now quite well dug into the pre-writing of the next book. So I'm thinking about that a lot, and it's actually quite refreshing to come back and talk about something that, so because I'm living with the fear all the time at the moment. Right. And so actually coming back and going, oh yeah, actually look, I wrote one and people liked it. I can do
have an accomplishment in life.
Yeah. So actually I find it quite refreshing. I mean, I do, it's a funny, I'm not sure how much I enjoy the thing of having a hardback, to be honest. It feels a bit like because hardly anybody buys hardback books, and so you don't really see any sales, and you feel that you're a terrible failure, and all of the rest of it, and you're sort of waiting for when it really starts, which is paperback. And so actually it's really nice that the paperback and the American edition are coming out at the same time, and actually blissfully my other big market, which is Poland, is also coming out. I'm huge in Poland, it's fantastic, a wonderful country, and such brilliant. Their journalists are just so much more exacting than any journalist I've come across in the Anglosphere. My God, they ask you some tough questions.
Love it. Can you tell us anything about your next project that you're working on?
Yeah. Okay. So the thing that is really catching me and is really interesting to me is that I think lots of people who lived through the 1970s are sort of feeling that now is awfully similar.
Yes.
And I think that we are just about to have a wave of terrorism. I think, I'm not sure which angle it's going to come from, but I think a lot of people have hit the sort of the level of radicalism and activism that is actually going in some of them to tip them over into blowing people up. And I've been having that feeling for some time, and so I've been reading up a huge amount about that world in the 1970s, and I'm particularly interested in the way that all the I just saw a snippet somewhere saying that the woman, I've forgotten her name now, who was sort of the front for the Weather Underground, has just retired from her long and distinguished career as a law professor at Northwestern University. So then I went and looked more up, and the ones that didn't either die or go to Cuba and have really miserable lives have all ended up, they went into Wall Street, they became corporate lawyers, they became academics, it's just extraordinary, and that
they
just
became part of the system they were fighting against.
About a bunch of recent retirees from the professions who all live together because they've all known each other all this time, because actually they are the leftover rump of the Baader Meinhof, and nobody's realized that. And my working title is Boomers, but sadly my publisher's already having laughed. Told me I'm not allowed to.
Well, you could probably tell from the gray in my beard that I remember much of the
Yeah.
1970s, and
Yeah.
I look forward to reading that when it comes out. But today, the Island of Lost Girls is available everywhere now, and you can go grab it. We'll put links in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon, or go visit your local bookstore and support local books. 100%.
Always.
Always support local books if at all possible. Alex, if people are just discovering you, God forbid, and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to and dig through your back catalog, where's the best place for them to find you online?
Well, I have a website, and I am on Facebook, as I have an author page, but I also am Alex Marwood on Facebook as a person, and I'm on Twitter. And I am apparently on Instagram, but fortunately somebody else does that for me, because I just sort of stare at this stuff and go, I can't. But I can be. I'm a bit dot and go one on Facebook. Sometimes I'm very chatty, and sometimes I disappear for months on end because I'm writing a book. But that's where you can find me largely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we'll link up all those places to make it easy for folks to find you. The Island of Lost Girls, go grab it today. You won't be disappointed.
I'm being savaged, by the way, by my muse who was hiding underneath it. So I'm sorry, I had to pick him up because he was literally lying there biting my hand and scrabbling at me.
Alex, this has been so much fun chatting.
It's been a real joy, Hank. Thank you so much for having me on.
That's our episode for today. There's so much more to come as we talk with authors about the craft of writing, but also the business of publishing. Be sure to subscribe to the Storycraft Cafe podcast in your favorite podcast app to never miss an episode. The Storycraft Cafe is made possible by Dabble. Writing a book is challenging. Your writing tool shouldn't be. Dabble is an easy-to-use online writing tool packed with helpful features that allow beginning novelists and published authors to create amazing stories. Visit us at dabblewriter.com and start your free trial. Thanks for listening.